Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our CFIB webinar. It is a bit of a different day for those of you who are returning, people who usually go visit our webinars every Thursday or every second Thursday now. Welcome, but we do have a special reason for that today. We do have the Minister, Mélanie Joly, joining us today. And we're really thrilled to have the minister with us. You just saw a bit of a glimpse of her, but she will be back in just a minute. Before we jump into the actual webinar, with just a few technical notes we wanted to make sure you were aware of. First, I'm Corinne Pullman. I'm the Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships for CFIB. For those of you who've come to our webinars in the past, you may recognize me. I am on my own today, not with my normal colleagues, Laura Jones and Rachel and Brendan, but we still have a great lineup here for you, and hopefully lots of questions that you'll be able to get answered today as well. So just technical reminders, if you have a question on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a question box where you can put in a question, and we may not be able to get to all that many today, but we're going to get to as many as we can. If we don't get to your question and you still feel like you want an answer, please feel free to reach out to CFIB. We will do our best to answer your question through our helpline, and I'll give you some of that details at the end. Secondly, there's also a handout tab, so if you want to have a copy of the presentation, please feel free to open that up and use that. That's also on the right-hand side under the handouts. So that is as a PDF form. So those are the things that you need to know in order for us to get started. So again, I want to thank the minister for joining us. And what we are going to be going over today, if we can move to the next slide, is just a couple things. We're going to have actually our president. We're very fortunate to have Dan Kelly join us today. He will be introducing the minister in just a moment. And then we're going to move into a few questions and answers, which is when I'll come back. The minister will also have a few remarks before we get into the Q&A. And then we'll sort of take it from there. So it's a little bit of a shorter webinar today. We'll be done in about 45 minutes, but hopefully you'll find it to be insightful and helpful for you and your business. All right, so with that, I'd like to introduce our president, Dan Kelly. He is joining us today. So for those of you who may have not seen Dan, though he is everywhere these days, I'm going to have Dan come back up and introduce the minister. Where are you, Dan?
I'm here.
So we want to put on your video, then you could, everyone can see.
Share my webcam. All right.
There you are. Excellent. All right. I will leave it to you.
Thanks, Corinne. And welcome, everybody. Good to have you with us. These webinars have been so incredibly positively received by our members. I've had tons of emails and tweets about them. Thanks so much for attending them so regularly, many of you. I look forward to connecting with you on social media or through email. But today I have a big pleasure to introduce the minister, Minister Mélanie Joly. Mélanie is the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages. Minister Joly has been incredibly generous with her time to CFIB. Has reached out regularly through the pandemic to give us an update of things that are happening in Ottawa, also soliciting our feedback on some of the government programs that have been put in place. And I'm really grateful. It's not every minister that does that, but she's been really good about staying in touch and taking seriously the concerns that we are hearing from so many of you as small business owners. And of course, you know, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of good work done in Ottawa in creating some of the support programs that are in place, changing the support programs as we discover areas where they're not working. Still a lot of work to do. We know and expect questions, I'm assuming, about the access for new businesses, which remains a giant issue of concern for CFIB. Some of the worries about ongoing lockdowns and the potential reductions in some of the subsidy programs at a time when the economy is in pretty rough shape overall. But we are looking forward to better days ahead and looking at the recovery, which may require some different measures to be put in place, like the new hiring incentive that the federal government has wisely introduced. So lots of great material ahead. Minister Joly, you've been just awesome to work with, and really grateful that you're taking the time to connect directly with our members. Thanks so much. Over to you, Minister.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan. Great to see all of you. I know many of you are taking the time this morning to have this conversation and hear a bit more about what we're doing as a government to help you out. Dan, I must say, it's been great to work with you as well. So I remember during the first lockdown when we were working together to increase the wage subsidy from 10% to 75%. I was hearing from your members, from entrepreneurs across the country, and obviously from CFIB how much we needed to act on that. And together we made that happen. So thank you again. Again, also when the CEBA account was changed, we decided to increase the level of forgivable part, the forgivable part of the loan from 10,000 to 20,000, but out of a 60,000. So basically from 1/4 to 1/3 of the loan becoming forgivable. So thanks for your hard work on that. It certainly helped, and we were able to make it happen. And also with the rent subsidy that we changed over the course of the pandemic, and which is now sent directly to property owners or obviously people that are renting. So we've been doing a great work together. But as you said, things are not perfect. We're still dealing with a pandemic and an economic crisis, and we need to do better. But my goal today, as I'll be answering tough questions from your members, is give the information about what we've done, but also the new information coming out of our budget. And the idea of the budget is obviously to make sure that we continue to fight against COVID, but at the same time, we know we've lost 1 million jobs during the economic crisis, and we need to make sure that these 1 million jobs are created again, and that we can continue to move on and eventually start economic growth again. So the budget has 3 pillars. The first one is really get through COVID, make sure that we can vaccinate people, that the vaccination process is doing well, and at the same time that we can continue to help businesses really bridge their operations, support them until we're on the other side of the pandemic. And that's why we've announced that the wage subsidy and also the rent relief and the lockdown support would be there until September 25th. You can see that there's a link between the vaccination timeline and also the subsidies and support timelines, because we've already said that every Canadian that wants to be vaccinated will be with 2 doses by September. So that's why the timeline for the support is the one of September 25th. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is about, we know that even after vaccination, we will be dealing with a COVID recession. Some parts of our population have been more impacted than others. Women, youth, low-wage workers, and obviously small businesses, the ones in the retail sector, tourism and hospitality sector, arts and entertainment. So that's why for each of these groups in the budget, there are support that are granted, and I'll be able to answer questions regarding particularly the small business and the different sectors, including particularly the tourism sector, which I'm in charge of. So that's for the second pillar. And the third pillar is really thinking ahead long term. What can we do to build back better? And so it's really investing in a green economy, a more inclusive and clean economy that is resilient. And so it's really investments in infrastructure, investments in making sure that there are more retrofits, that we can be also when I say retrofits, I mean household retrofits. So basically green renovations, helping small businesses also to pivot to have access to new technologies that are reducing carbon footprint. So many things to deal also with the impacts of climate change. So these are the three pillars. I've talked enough at this point. It would be great just to hear from you. My goal is to listen, to see what's working, what can be improved. That has been the approach that we've been taking with Dan and CFIB's team since the beginning of the pandemic and the economic crisis. And so let's dive into the questions.
Great. Thank you, Minister. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to sort of outline some of the priorities of the government right now. But we do have lots and lots of questions, as you can imagine, lots of people.
I know that. That's why I'm ready.
Excellent. So the first question comes from Luke, and Luke is actually here today as well, and he's from Timmins. And he actually runs a hotel that he started sort of planning for in 2017 and 18, had even a payroll number by 2019, but didn't actually open the facility until 2020, August 2020, actually. But as a result of that, he's actually not been eligible for any support. So he's really one of many business owners, as you know, in this sort of category who really, because they opened their businesses after March 2020, they've not been able to access any of the programs. So they're wondering, is there any plans to introduce amendments to these programs, or are there new programs maybe coming for new businesses? Because many of them are really feeling it, as you can imagine, right?
And I hear that, Corinne, and I've heard it from many entrepreneurs. And as also Dan mentioned at the beginning, we're still working as a government to find solutions for new businesses, because obviously we know that there's still improvements to be made, since the very important programs such as the wage subsidy, the rent relief, and the CEBA accounts are linked to basically businesses that were already in operations before the pandemic. Good news is, though, the budget presents new initiatives and programs that will be available for new businesses. That includes a couple of things. The first one being the fact that businesses will be able to have access to loans that through their financial institutions that have been increased from 350,000 to 500,000, and in the expenses that can be covered by this loan through financial institutions, it will also include all startup expenses. So that's one good news. Second news is we're doing a lot in this budget to help small businesses have access to new technologies. So really there's a new measure. I really hope that you talk to your accountant to have more information about it, but it's up to $1.5 million that can be in technology assets that can be supported. And in that sense, that's also available to all businesses, but also to new businesses. And finally, we know that credit cards have been very, very much used during the context of this pandemic because it was a very safe way to pay. And also there was more online shopping. And therefore, the credit card fees have been an issue for many retailers. So what we want to do is really get into really some important negotiations with the credit card companies to make sure that we reduce the fees, because we think it's a question actually of having a better balance between basically the costs that our small businesses are bearing, and at the same time the money that the big credit card companies are making on the backs of small retailers.
And that certainly would help, I think, to see some of those credit card fees start coming down. And I think it's good news to hear that there are some programs that potentially could help. But I will say that Luke and to others out there, CFIB will continue to put pressure on the minister and her peers within government to make sure that there's more available, because we know that going into debt isn't always the best solution for a lot of these businesses. And I'll give you one example. We have Bob here from British Columbia. He has a sporting goods business and he's lost over 300,000 and has had to take on a significant amount of debt that he says he'll have to pay off for years to come. And so he's wondering, is the government looking to write off a larger portion of small business government loans or introduce any other measures to help small businesses with their debt right now?
Yeah, well, a couple of things on that. Obviously, for businesses that that were operating before the pandemic, we've been there with the wage subsidy, which is a subsidy. We've been there with the rent relief support and lockdown support also, which is also a subsidy. And as I said, we increased the forgivable part of the small business loans, the CBA accounts, so basically the account is now 60,000 of loans, and there's 20,000 that is forgivable. So that's also a subsidy if reimbursed in the right amount of time. I know I've been getting some questions about the timeline for the reimbursement. I know that many small businesses are preoccupied because they see that timeline of June 2021 coming. Folks, will be flexible also. We've been flexible since the beginning of the pandemic, and we'll see. Things can change very quickly from the moment that people are vaccinated and that the economy is restarting and relaunching again. There's pent up demand for sure, and in many sectors, such as the hospitality and tourism sector, a lot of people will want to travel and spend in these sectors. But we will adapt because we know that we're facing an event that nobody thought we would be facing, but also it's one of the biggest crises since the Second World War. So all that to say, I think there's a trust that has been built between the government and obviously small businesses across the country. We will continue to work to make sure that we continue to earn that trust.
Well, that's great. And it's great to hear there may be some flexibility coming in the future, because I know, as you said, we've been hearing the same. Many businesses are worried about that deadline that's coming on the CBA loan for sure.
And Corinne, I used to run a business before being in politics. I'm a former entrepreneur. I was heading a communications agency, so I understand the pressures, the anxiety, and also trying to mitigate risk and trying to get certainty. So I get it, folks, and I know that's one of the reasons why you're on this Zoom right now, because you want answers to your questions, and so I'm giving you as much information as I can right now.
Well, and I think that's very much appreciated. But as you can imagine, there's lots and lots more questions. I did want to get to Sid's question. Sid's from Collingwood. He owns a theater, which puts on shows, films, and concerts. But he's been completely shut down, as you probably know, since the beginning of COVID, not brought in any revenue. But despite this, he's not been able to get the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, CERS, because of how his business is structured. So he doesn't qualify under the general prescribed terms because the overall property is owned by one company and the theater space is rented by the production company, both of which he actually owns. So he wants to know, will the government change the CERS program to ensure that businesses with non-arm's length structures can access the programs?
Well, obviously, since he's an owner of the property, he can have access to support. He can have access to basically any reimbursement of property taxes, of interest on his mortgage, and also on insurance for his insurance fees for his property. So that's something that is important, because we've been talking a lot about rent subsidy, but it is also for owners that are ongoing difficult times because there's a lockdown in their region, and therefore they then have access to funding to make sure that part of their expenses are covered.
Great. And I think that that's definitely one that maybe, Sid, we can try to help you with if you haven't looked at it already. But also you should know that we continue to advocate for that change, because as we know, and maybe you know, Sid, under the previous program, you could get the rent subsidy as well. So this is something, just so you know, Minister, we're continuing to advocate for on behalf of our members. So. But I think it's important to point out there is this way that you can get some of it. And Sid, we can certainly try to help you if you want to call our helpline if you haven't tried that already. Talking again about the events business a little bit. So we have Kelly from Fergus, and Rosemary from Windsor. They own businesses also in the special events category, and they've been, as you know, very hard hit. Many of them have not been open now for well over a year. So they're asking, does the government have plans to introduce any specific supports or programs for this industry, like other governments have done for others, I guess tourism, for example?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. So for small business in general, there will be a hiring incentive, so which will be something that will be there, while also the wage subsidy will be there. But the idea is to make sure that bit by bit people go from the wage subsidy to the hiring incentive. So that will help. At the same time, what we're trying to do as well is to make sure that there are targeted supports. So we are investing $1 billion in tourism, and I'll explain where that money will be invested in, Corinne, because I think the event planning industry will get its fair share based on the fact that we're investing in the tourism sector. So please follow me. So we're investing $200 million in major events, so big festivals, which we know usually, then will pay many caterers and many organizations, firms that are also in that space. We're also investing $200 million in smaller events, so smaller festivals across the country. We're also investing $100 million through Destination Canada to promote people to travel the country, but also when it's safe to do so, to make sure that we welcome the world, or actually people that are safe to enter Canadian, our territory, and therefore that won't be a threat to the health of Canadians. And finally, we're investing $500 million in the tourism fund. So this will be through the regional development agencies. So depending on where you are in the country, ACOA in Atlantic Canada, DEC in Quebec, FedDev in Southern Ontario, FedNor in Northern Ontario, Western Economic Diversification in the West, and also CANOR in the territories. And so that will be for businesses that are in the tourism sector to help them invest while not going into too many debts of their company. So it's really to create more new experience and all. So for the events planning sector, they will be able to have some benefits from these investments, but still, it is not the wedding or the sweet 16 party. But I think that with everything we're doing for small businesses, from the different subsidies I've been talking a lot about, from this new hiring incentive, from also investing in technology, having access to more liquidities, I think this will help them out. Finally, there's a program that is super important for people in this sector. It's called a HASCAP. So for highly impacted sectors. Luc, which is in Timmins, you mentioned, that is, has a hotel. He has access also to this program. It is a program that offers basically loans, so liquidity again, but that will be reimbursable over 10 years, Corinne. So in that sense, it's really at this point nearly equity, and it's only 4% of interest, and it's 100% guaranteed by the government of Canada. So you don't have to put your own, personal assets on the line to make sure that you have access to that funding. So I think if you don't know about this program yet, please work with the CFIB or work with our regional development agencies, and they're available at your financial institutions.
Yes, and I would say that the HASCAP loan has some definite advantages to it. Again, though, it is a debt vehicle, even though you have 10 years to pay it off. And we've certainly been advocating for maybe putting a forgivable portion into that particular loan program, so that there's that sort of hopefully encouraging more people to maybe take it on as a result, because I think you're right, the parameters around it are quite interest rate. It doesn't require a personal guarantee, though there's been some miscommunication between the banks and I think BDC on that front. So thankfully, BDC has been doing a good job of trying to correct that. So if anybody out there is having problems with ASCAP, please let us know. We've been working closely with the BDC to try to make sure that you can access those funds, because some of the banks are still calling for personal guarantees, which you don't need for that particular loan program.
That's it.
Okay, so I did want to just touch on something Glenn asked, and this is coming in from live today that's related somewhat to this. He was asking, will the funding for, and I don't know if you know this topic, will the funding for small events that was included in the budget that will be administered by Canadian Heritage be available for small businesses or only to nonprofits? I don't know if you have the answer to that question.
Well, usually I must say it's through small, non-for-profits, because Canadian Heritage only provides subsidies, and it is only for the cultural sector. So, you know, they don't provide any loans, and they don't deal with the private sector. So that's why the $200 million for big events, so major festivals, are through the regional development agencies, because we deal usually much more with businesses, sometimes with non-for-profits, but we're the only ones that can offer non-for-profit, you know, interest-free loans or also subsidies.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. So I also want to speak a little bit about some of the programs that you're administering around the CBDC. So we have Erna from PEI. She's unable to qualify for the additional $20,000. So she was able to, because she couldn't get the original because her payroll was too small, she was able to access the $40,000 through the CBDC. But she's worried that the summer will be even worse for her tourism business and needs this additional funding. But she has had some trouble. On April 2nd, she was told that despite applying on time, there's no money in the program. So I don't know if you could clarify for Erna what's going on with the money at the CBDCs.
Yeah. So good news, Erna. So we've solved your problem. So there was more money, $500 million more, for the regional development agencies and the CBDCs in the fall economic statement. Imagine that. That was in December. It was long for the House to approve this and pass the legislation. There was a lot of filibustering on the part of the opposition, particularly the Conservatives, I must say. And finally, the legislation passed on May 5th. And so the money will be sent to the CBDCs, and you'll have access to that funding. So they will be able to provide you with the $20,000 more that is needed for you to basically have access to the money that is required to operate your business and survive the pandemic. So that's the idea.
So would she should just wait to hear from them, or would you encourage her to make another inquiry?
I think it's worth just you know, taking the phone, calling the CBDCs. They're super nimble, super well organized, and I think good news is what we did with the CBDCs across the country is we tripled their budget during the pandemic. And what happened is these loans that we've given to the CBDCs, and that in turn they're making sure to offer to businesses, when businesses will be paying back the non-forgivable portions, it will not then be sent to the federal government. So the CBDCs will be keeping that. And so we've been recapitalizing the entire CBDC network during this pandemic. So after this pandemic, because we think that a big part of the loans will be repaid, they will be at least having 50% more budget, and they will be able to support you and your business in the coming years as well, because they will be well tooled to make sure that that's the case across our beautiful regions of the country.
That's great. And just some feedback for you. We had certainly heard the CBDC loans seem to be going quite well throughout the pandemic. It was a little more tricky with the regional development agencies at points, but the CBDCs did seem to do a nice job of trying to get the money out quickly.
I think the regional development agencies, it depended where you were in the country. So in Atlantic Canada it went well, in Quebec as well, in Ontario as well. I think we needed more capacity in the West. And so, Corinne, that's why we're creating a new agency only for BC. And in
Right.
the budget, we're increasing its, basically, we're making sure that it has $110 million of budget per year. So that's the first time we'll have that. And we won't only have a footprint and an office in Vancouver. The idea is to make sure that we're much more present across BC. And meanwhile, we're creating a new agency for the prairies. And we are increasing, so we're doubling the amount, the budget of the Regional Development Agency for the prairies per capita. And also, we're making sure that there will be an increased footprint across the prairies also. So we've learned from the pandemic, but we know we had a capacity issue, and that's why we're investing.
Great. And thank you. That's a good clarification. Luke from LaSalle wanted to know, will the federal government implement a grant program or funding to help compensate businesses who have stayed open but have increased costs to cope with COVID, such as signage, plexiglass, disinfectants, and all those things?
So, of course, if you have access to your CBA account, that's the idea, to make sure that basically you can deal with the increased cost. And that's why the CBA accounts include a $20,000 out of the $60,000 part that is forgivable. If you're not able to have access to the CBA account, well, that's when you come and see either your CBDCs, like we were just talking about, which is for much more rural Canada, or also your regional development agency. And part of the expenses that can be covered by the support through the regional development agencies and the CBDCs are exactly that. Cost for expenses linked to the fact that you had to make sure that you had to buy some equipment to deal with social distancing rules, making sure that you had to adapt your business to make sure that your workforce was able to work in a safe way. So that's exactly, PPE, for example. So that's exactly what this is all, being put together to make sure that you're able to pay these expenses.
Great. That's definitely something to continue to think about. So hopefully the CBA loan is something that they have and they're able to use for that purpose. Yep. A little bit sort of off topic, but I wanted to sort of squeeze it in, as Robert from Lachine also has a company that designs and manufactures some of the key machinery involved in manufacturing of optical fibers, and was wondering whether the government's rural broadband strategy will prioritize Canadian suppliers such as his.
Okay, so a couple of things. Just before the budget, we had announced the Universal Broadband Fund of a $1.5 billion to make sure that we could really connect these rural regions that are still not connected, and that's unacceptable. And we saw that during the pandemic, how much we're so dependent on the internet. With the budget, we added another $1 billion. To have access to the Universal Broadband Fund, there needs to be a partnership between a firm that is able to propose building the infrastructure and also a firm that is able to operate the infrastructure. So if that combo is basically presented, then these folks are able to have access to the Universal Broadband Fund. The government of Canada is not involved in the suppliers of these companies, but obviously we want to make sure that we're able to support Canadian-made products, and at the same time that we are complying with our free trade agreements, which are so important for businesses across this country. So I hear you about the importance of supporting Made in Canada fiber, and particularly in the region of Montreal where I am, and I commend you for that. But I think that just the sheer fact that there is $2.7 billion on the table right now will create a lot of demand, and therefore I hope that you're able to do some good business development with some infrastructure companies, and at the same time operators that can have and will need your products. So good luck with that.
All right, so keep that in mind there. So a couple more, I'm getting quite a lot of questions on the feed coming in about, well, I'm going to use Ben's example because it's typical of quite a few questions that are coming in. He says, there's a restaurant owner in downtown Toronto's financial district,
Yep.
still severely impacted by COVID,
Of course.
and expects that through the summer, offices will remain predominantly empty, and wants to know why the government is reducing the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy benefits during these months when we need the assistance more than ever. The existing programs are already based on a sales percent reduction, so these businesses that are recovering will already receive less help, but those of us hardest hit, example, clubs, events, downtown core businesses, need the full amounts of those subsidies. And he's one typical of quite a few questions coming in around that change that's coming over the summer. So, and for businesses like his, I think they feel it's, you know, going to be taken away at a time they might still need it. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's important to look at the new hiring, also the new hiring benefit that will be offered. We'll have more information to say about that, Corinne, in the coming days and weeks. But I think that will bring some certainty for sure for businesses that are in the tourism and hospitality sector that are still either undergoing lockdown or are impacted by the fact that there's teleworking and no international students and no international tourists. What I've seen clearly across the country is our downtown cores in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Halifax, etc., have been very much impacted because of the three phenomena that I've just mentioned: international tourists, international students, and teleworking. And so I think that what we will be looking at in the context of the recovery is to make sure that we support many initiatives to bring people back in downtown cores. That's something that I'll be working on through the tourism fund that we'll be launching. And also, I've given a couple of interviews last week, Corinne, on also the fact that we're looking at developing a certification for international tourists that would want to come to Canada to make sure we're keeping Canadians healthy, but at the same time that we recognize the importance of supporting our tourism sector in a safe way. So I had a meeting with the G20 ministers of tourism last week to talk about these issues. We already have an app that has been developed by the Government of Canada that is called ArriveCan. It is an app to follow any person that is arriving in Canada, that in order to make sure that they are tested, and that we follow up on the basically the tests that they're providing. We're one of the only countries in the world to have this app, so in that sense we have a head start. So we're looking at whether we will be improving the app or developing another form of certification. So these are the conversations we're having. So basically there's light at the end of the tunnel. I know this is a very difficult situation for people that are restaurant owners or club owners, bars, but we're really looking at what is the world post-COVID and how can we make sure that your business is able to operate, and at the same time that we can have a safe flow of tourists coming here that won't be a threat to the health of our population.
Okay. All right, great. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in before.
Go ahead, Corinne. I'm ready. I'm ready.
This one is a bit, maybe a bit outside of your ability, but I'm going to throw it at you and see what you think.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good example of some of the other pressures small businesses are facing. So Angela is saying her small business needs help with insurance. 2020 rates went up 40%, and 2021 is going up at least another 40%, and they've had no claims. So they're just looking, she's just looking for some sort of like thoughts on, how to manage this. I know it's a bit outside the scope of government even, but it is something we hear a lot, and I'd be just curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, it's something that I've been hearing as well, and it's affecting businesses, but it's affecting also, even households, because we're seeing that affecting not only the private sector, I mean, the small businesses and bigger businesses, but even, insurance, property insurance. So Is it due to the fact that there's too much concentration of insurance, of the insurance companies' offers? Is it because there's need to be more competition? Is it, it's really at this point, there's more information to be gathered on it, Corinne, because I'm preoccupied by the phenomenon as well. And I've been raising it with my colleagues. So this is really something we're looking at. This cannot be a way to increase potential inflation in the country. And so that's why this is something that I'm very preoccupied with. So thank you, Angela, for your comment and question. And I don't have the exact answer to provide to you at this time, but this is certainly something I will follow up with my colleagues.
Yeah, and Angela, it's something we're hearing a lot too. We're working with the Insurance Bureau of Canada to try to come up with solutions that can help. If you are struggling to find somebody also, or somebody to even, if you're a business out there that's struggling even to find coverage, we can potentially help you with that as well. So please give us a call. But we know we're hearing this more and more, and it couldn't come at a worse time. So. All right, so I'm cognizant of the time, and I wanted to leave a couple minutes, and I wanted to thank everybody. I know there are many, many, many more questions that we could not get to, and my apologies for that. Perhaps we can quickly put up the final slide, which is some information on how to reach us. So we didn't get to your question. Please give us a call. We will do everything we can to sort of try to help you through. As Minister Joly mentioned, the regional development agencies can maybe help with that as well, though they're probably also busy trying to deal with applications for subsidies and grants. But please feel free to give us a call. And I want to thank you, Minister, for joining us. And before we sign off, I wanted to give you a couple minutes to maybe say a closing remarks.
Thank you, Corinne. As I mentioned, I know these have been tough times, and I know that there is still a lot to be done to make sure that our small businesses are, feeling better and going through better times. But know that there is help out there to make sure that you're able to survive the pandemic. One of the most effective ways, if you don't know your regional development agency at this point, make sure you do, because these are very useful tools. And obviously, the idea is to make sure that we can provide you with either loans, either sometimes subsidies, but quite frankly, also some technical help. So really resources that can help you deal with things like your human resources, or your maybe you need to invest in marketing, or you have an issue in terms of dealing with technologies. Basically, just some help to make sure that through this haze, you're able to find your way and bounce back again. During the pandemic, we more than tripled the budget of our regional development agencies. These are ways for the federal government to be much more decentralized in a time where we've, as a government, never played such as big of a role in small businesses' lives, in your life, in life of Canadians. So my last words would be basically, we've been there since the beginning of the pandemic. We're here now, and we will be there in the future. So keep it up, folks. I wish you all the best, all the resilience and the strength you need to go through these difficult times. And right now, the most important thing is, let's make sure that you have access to the information. You can get the help that is offered to you in the budget. So please work with the CFIB and with the regional development agencies to have access to the funds that are there for you. So thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. And let's talk together again soon. Thanks, Corinne, and thanks, Dan.
Yes, thank you again, Minister Joly, and thank you everybody for joining us. We really do appreciate it, and we are here to help whenever you need us. Fill out our surveys, please call our help center. And just as a reminder, we also have petitions of some of the things we talked about up here today that we encourage you to sign on our website, including ones for new businesses as well as for the rent subsidy. If that's of interest to you, I want to remind you to please join us. And the more voices we have, the more important it can for government to potentially make those changes as well. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And with that, we're going to close the webinar.
Thank you, folks.